All right. So I'm really excited today to present two great guests who volunteered like everybody else. I'm a volunteer, and we have two really great guests who are volunteers as well. So we're very lucky today to be hearing from some people who can help us in so many different ways. I always do an introduction, so you have to put up with me for 5 or 10 minutes. So there you go. I'm going to share my screen with you before we get to our guests. And let's see if I can get the right slide here. So welcome again to the ROI group. We do record these things, as you know. It goes on YouTube unlisted, and everybody gets gets a copy of it. So if you want to look at it again, or something in it that you didn't understand, you can go back and have a look at it. We usually get anywhere from 30 to 50 people live, and then a couple of hundred views on YouTube for people who can't come to these Wednesday noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific, can't come live to it. So there you go. My name is Bruce Firestone. You all know me, I think. And there's my email address. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me if you need to talk to me for any reason. Bruce@brucemfirestone.com. You all know where the chat box is. So if you have any questions for me or for the presenters, put it in the chat box and I'll see it, and I'll try and make sure that we get as many questions answered as we can. And it's fun to have questions, so feel free, just type away. You don't have to be shy, because typing is easier, I think, than talking in so many ways. So today, what we're going to hear first from Nikola. He went to Queen's University Commerce. He's done lots of presentations, and in 2020 he started something that was called StudioPod. Back then, is now called EcoPod. And if you saw the email I sent this morning, he's doing some really cool stuff with this startup that I really like. And it's a form of animation. I talk all the time about property animation, adding new revenue streams. So it fits in perfectly with what we're trying to do as real estate investors and developers. And Nikola will tell you more about himself in a moment. And this is one of the slides. I kind of cheated and I took it from Nikola's presentation. But the idea of having some kind of mini office, studio office, whatever, in your backyard is awesome. If it's your own principal residence, but also if you're renting property. I do this all the time, where I have a tenant in a duplex or a triplex, and then I have a workshop or something like this in the backyard. And one of the cases that we're going to hear from Nikola about is how Lana, a hairstylist, was able to put one of these in the backyard. I guess it was maybe the landlord who did it, and rented it to Lana, and the landlord is getting a 12.5% cap rate. For those of you who know and understand cap rates, which is everybody on this call, 12.5% is pretty good. I set as a minimum for myself and the people that I coach a cap rate of 6%. And so if you can get 8 or 9 or 10%, wow, that's great. 12.5% is terrific. And we're going to hear lots more about that when I turn it over to the founder of EcoPod, Nikola. And then after that, this is a subject that people don't like to talk about. But when corporate debt gets out of hand, what do you do? And we're going to hear from John after Nikola, and he's going to talk about some strategies that you can employ to deal with that. And it doesn't always end in bankruptcy. And I'm not an accountant, I'm just a lowly engineer, but we're going to hear from John, and he's going to describe some cases and some studies and some alternative methods of dealing with out of control debt. And John, I have a question for you. Where were you in the mid-2000s when the Senators went broke?
I actually worked on that file, but you don't want to know that.
I did know that. So this is me back in the day, in the very first year of the Ottawa Senators team. This is me in the middle here. I think this was 1993. Rod Bryden is on my right, Mel Bridgman on my left. There's Rick Bowness, who's still active in the National Hockey League, Cyril Leader, who was president of the team for decades, Bernie Ash, Randy Sexton, of course, our first year team. And those of you who know me well know that I was closely involved with the Senators and the Canadian Tire Center, a 20,000 seat arena. And unfortunately, the Canadian dollar, when we bought the team, went from about 90 cents, 89 cents to the US dollar down to 62 or 63 cents. And our payroll went from about 6.5 million Canadian dollars to $84 million. And the team went bankrupt. And this is a cartoon from back in the day. This was in the mid 2000s. Ottawa Senators, bankrupt, maybe moved south. Thank God they weren't. They're still here in Ottawa. And but the guy who did move was me. I had to find another way of earning a living. And this is just a picture of me when I went to Stockholm to teach at Hyper Island. So I skedaddled for a little bit and started doing some more teaching at not just at in Stockholm, but elsewhere as well. And I wanted to say to everybody as well, I wanted to talk a little bit about Isabelle. This is a young designer, and she reached out to me a while ago now. She took time out of the profession to have a baby, which is very important. I love kids. I've got 5 wonderful kids and a bunch of grandchildren, having 2 more this year, by the way. Two of my daughters are having a baby, which is cool. So Isabelle reached out to me. She's coming back into the profession, and there is an incredible shortage, not just of a shortage of construction materials and construction labor, but even in design. And so I said to Isabelle, I would give her a bit of an acknowledgement. If you're looking for some design services, she comes highly recommended, and you can see her contact information there. Her phone number is 613-612-4369, and her email address is there, Bazinet at Hotmail with a dash in it. You can see it there at hotmail.com. I just ask people to mute themselves when they're on the call or when they're not speaking, just so we don't have a lot of background noise. So I want to help people. I think the ROI group is about helping each other. And if you have some kind of renovation project and you need some help, please reach out to Isabelle and get a quote. I think we should try and support each other. I always say thank you, if I can, to our sponsors. We have 2 of them for the ROI group. Steve Shepard, who is my personal lawyer and a wonderful real estate lawyer, just a super, super great person. I can't say enough about him. He's a partner at skslaw.ca. And I really like Matt Slobodian. He is the big shooter in mortgage financing as far as CMHC funding is concerned. I think he does more deals with CMHC funding than anybody else in Canada. And the cool thing is he just moved from Winnipeg to Ottawa, so he's very close to me now. And I strongly recommend you reach out to Matt if you're doing any kind of financing for multi-res building. And you can get, I think, 85% loan to value, long mortgage amortizations. You get, I think, 2% financing, which is really good. So and this is the person to reach out to. So I just can't say enough about Matt. This is kind of the last little bit for me before I turn it over to Nikola. Next month in March, I'm doing another course called Reward Yourself, how to really find, buy, finance, renovate, refinance multi-res buildings with great cap rates. I get asked this all the time, and I just wanted to do a course where I could help people with this. I get it. I mean, I must get 50 or 60 requests every quarter on how do I buy multi-res, how do I find them, and I thought I'd do a course on it. So I'm going to do one next month called Reward Yourself.
Ooh.
And I'm going to give you an example of one of my clients. Nikola, how old are you now?
21.
21. Okay, so he's older than you. So this particular client is 29, and he said he did the same thing. He called me up. How do I get into multi-res? And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now for a moment and just see if there's somebody there maybe I have to mute. Unfortunately. Do you notice anybody who's not muted? Maybe James here. I think everybody else. Okay, I'm going to mute Greg and Ken. I think everybody's muted. I apologize. So I'm going to go back to sharing again. So this young fellow, he was 29, asked me, how do I get into the multi-res building business? And I said, I want to talk about something called Main Street makeovers. And he said, what the heck is a makeover? Well, at age 70, I could certainly use a makeover, but what I'm looking at and what I'm going to teach next month is how to find great buildings. Everybody can tell you, hey, it's great to buy a multi-res property, but they can't really tell you how to find one without being, one of 10 bidders or one of 20 bidders or one of 8 bidders or whatever. And I don't like competitive situations as a buyer because often you end up overpaying. So I told them, let's look in a small town. And I learned a new term just before Christmas of last year, from a couple of clients of mine who live in California called Zoom towns. And you may have heard me talk about Zoom towns before. I didn't know what they were, but a Zoom town is a town or city within an hour or two of a larger center that is booming because of Zoom, because of work from home. And so he found this property in Prescott, which is a very small town, about an hour south of Ottawa. Maybe it has 7,000 or 8,000 people in it. And this is the property he ended up buying. And I'll just walk you through this. So this is a property that had been for sale for a long DOM, long days on the market, which is a good thing if you're a buyer. And the buyers were spooked because Prescott is a small town and people are often afraid of having not just some residential apartments to rent, which this building has on the second floor, but having some commercial. And a lot of buyers are afraid of multi-res that include some commercial because those could be vacant for a long time. But actually, I quite like them. So you wouldn't buy something like this unless you had a plan to animate it. You know, I use that term over and over again, so you're probably sick of hearing it now. So I talked to the young coaching client of mine, and I said, well, what if you made the commercial spaces a little bit smaller and you were to fit a residential unit in behind? So you could add another residential unit at grade. And people love this live work condition. It's been just phenomenal what's been going on in the last few months. In fact, the last couple of years since the pandemic hit us, that people want to live and work in the same building if they can. So what he did was he bought this building. I'll show you the numbers in a minute. Made the commercial space smaller, added a residential unit in behind. He created the live work condition. And this is what he did with the ground floor commercial space, turned it into a laundromat. So this is what the building looks like today. And here's some math, okay? Really arithmetic. He bought this building. Look at this, you guys. For anybody who lives in Toronto or Vancouver, people who live in San Francisco or Los Angeles, buying a building, you know, in the old downtown core of Prescott for $132,500 looks pretty good. He renovated it for about $167,000. So his total investment was $300,000. The laundromat, the net operating income he gets from the laundromat is about $1,000 a month. The balance of the building, now he's got 3 residential units, is producing about $3,000 a month of net income, which means he has net income of $48,000 bucks. And his cap rate is about 16%. Remember I said I don't like to buy property, or anybody I coach buy property less than 6%. So if you get to 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, that's fantastic. 16% is outstanding. And then he calls me up and he says he got it reappraised based on an 8% cap rate, which means, of course, it doubled in value. So that's a pretty good result. It meant that within 18 months of buying it, he was able to take out with a new mortgage, $150,000 in tax-free cash. That's a Main Street makeover. It's got some animation in it. And, you know, and it's hard to save $150,000 when you're 29 years of age in 18 months. But he got that money and it's tax-free. And then he's going to rinse and repeat. So that's a kind of a no money down deal if you look at it over a period of 18 months. It's not a no money down deal. He had to have some cash, which he did, to buy the property and renovate it. And there were some things that we did to finance that as well, but he had some cash. But if you think about it over that 18-month period, it's not just a no money down deal, it's a negative money down deal. So anyway, so next month in March, if you're interested on 3 Saturdays, I'm going to give this course called Reward Yourself, and you can sign up if you want to at burningrocksolutions.com/checkout-multi. That's a big mouthful, but if you remember my last name, Firestone, you can remember Burning Rocks, right? Burning Rock and Firestone. So burningrocksolutions.com checkout/checkout-multi. And it's a $497 investment, but I did put a coupon code in here. If you can see it at the bottom, if you want to take note of it, it gives you $200 off. So it's an investment of $297, including tax. We pay the tax. If you put the code in multi-4942, multi-4942. So anyway, that's enough for me. Nikola, I made you the co-host, and listen, why don't you take it away, and I'll just mute myself, and I look forward to hearing more.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the introduction, Bruce. I'm gonna share my screen right now. If you guys can see this. Oh, uh-oh, ran into a little bit of a problem. Okay, I see what the problem is.
Sometimes you have two screens. Do you have two screens, Nikola?
For some reason on my end, it's not giving me permission off my computer.
Well, I do have your slides. I can always show them if you want.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen again, so I'm not gonna be able to move myself. I'm not getting any time off here, Nikola. All right, so hang on a second. I'll move this over here. I'll make it full screen so everybody can see it. I think full screen mode. So does that, can you see it okay, Nikola?
Yep, I can.
All right, so I won't mute myself. I'll just, I'll be the one to turn the pages, okay?
Awesome.
Oh, I guess I better go to the beginning, right? Yeah. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. How's it? I hope everyone's doing okay. My name is Nikola. As Bruce mentioned, I'm a Queen student, and today I want to present a project that I've been working on for the past 2 years, and the project is called EcoPod. So basically, a little introduction on me on the next slide. Bruce already mentioned. However, I was born and raised in Ottawa. Went to St. Pius, so from the Nepean area. After high school, I went to Queen's University, where I was really focused on investments I was doing in different areas like real estate, and a large specialization of mine was stocks. And so I spent quite a bit of time on that. And then after my summer in Toronto doing stocks, I had an entrepreneurship class, and that's where I incubated this project, this home office project that I'm going to be sharing today. And basically, this is going to be interesting for those looking for home renovations, and honestly, anyone who's a homeowner, perhaps a wine enthusiast. There's all sorts of different situations that people are finding to use the StudioPod, like living rooms and yoga studios. And today, I really want to go through and share a little bit of case studies and show, I guess, the different type of uses and how many different ways we could turn it into a livable space. So on the next page, just a little bit of the product overview on what we do. So on the next one, we have basically the thing is a workspace that goes in the backyard. We also call them studio rooms or sheds, but the interior is outfitted so that it's fully livable. So on the image on the right, we have the Banff, which is a 9x12 model. So it's about 108 square feet. The interior is fully finished for the client so that they have basically the ability to use it on 4 different seasons. So even if it's -30 outside, the client will be able to use that and keep it warm to 23 degrees. And so one of the key things I'm probably going to be honing in on today is the fact that if we build it on 108 square feet or less, one of the benefits that we get is that we won't need a permit. So we can go straight to the construction and put it on the site, and there's no need to go through any approval process. And so we have a range of different upgrades. For example, one of the upgrades that people really like is the heated floors, so that they're able to take off their shoes and enjoy it, and even after work, be able to use it as a living room. And basically, I met Bruce last year when I was. I'll get into the story. Actually, I'll start the story right now. It's a funny story. My parents were looking to purchase a 2-bedroom apartment, which was located on Prince of Wales, next to Mooney's Bay, actually. So those high-rise towers next to Farmers Pick. And we purchased this for the purpose of an investment. And our real estate agent actually took one of Bruce's courses. And he suggested that, and he introduced us. And I really was asking Bruce for mentorship and learning more about the real estate industry, because I was making sort of a pivot from the investment industry as a general to more real estate. And so I met with Bruce and we laid out a plan. And that summer, we worked the plan and tried to get this thing prototyped and built. And trying to see what the clients like, communicating with them, seeing what they really wanted.
There's no video, I don't think.
So one of the things that we were learning for the summer is perhaps if a client, was going to work in the morning, one of the lessons that we were learning is, if they have to show up to the studio and it's 8:30 and they have to get to work at 8:30, their meeting in the morning, if they show up in the studio and they have to crank up the thermometer, then they have to sit in, freezing weather for about 15 minutes. So one of the things we learned is to include a smart thermostat, which gives the option for the studio to be heated as soon as you walk in, for the floors to be nice and warm, cozy and comfortable and whatnot. So that's a little bit of the product, and we'll revisit it again after the case studies. But I guess we'll go into a little bit of the uses now on the next slides.
Nikola, just before you go ahead, you'll notice, everybody, that it's about on 108 square feet, it's about $350 a square foot. And so some of you might be saying, oh my gosh, that's expensive. But actually, compared to something I did last year, I built a little home, a small home of 192 square feet for one of my daughters. It's tiny, but it has everything in it. It has the kitchen and the bathroom, living, dining, it has everything in 192 square feet. And if I tell you guys how much it cost, you'll freak out. It was $120,000, including well and septic and all the other things that we had to do. So that's over $600 a square foot. So the smaller the building, the more expensive it is per square foot. All right, next slide. Here we are.
Right. So the case studies, there's different uses. There's well, initially what we were thinking is, there's a lot of homeowners that want to use an extra space at home. And then Bruce came up with a few ideas that, we haven't thought of before, that, self-employed people like therapists and agents and chiropractors could be using. And so we're going to be looking at a few case studies of office workers, homeowners, and then business owners, what they could be using, as their own, for example, home office to meet with clients and stuff. And so I guess the first case that we're going to be going into, this is, one of the clients we worked with last summer. So essentially, Tanya, she was a marketer, and her company told her early on that they're going to be working from home permanently, as was the case with my mother, actually, who she was an engineer, but she worked for Shopify, and within a couple of weeks, they said, we're going to go home permanently. So she found herself in a problem where she was working from the computer at home, but at the same time, she lived with, family, and they were, watching TV all the time, and her bedroom was right next to the TV. She lived in a bungalow. So her story was, she was working from home, but she had issues with distractions, lack of productivity, and really, the driver of that was not having a dedicated workspace, a place to call your office. So she really wanted a workspace to focus on, and so we built it in her backyard, facing her home. And so one of the things that she does is she put in, her desk and her monitor, and she has her meetings there, and she shows up at work at 8:30, and then she leaves her computer and she leaves work at the door. And then she basically managed to separate work and home. And I guess one of the main issues that, most people are, sort of fatigued from, and, they sort of don't even have, it's a blend of work and home, and they don't really have that kind of distinction anymore. And home is supposed to be for home and family, and, and work is kind of creeping into that slowly. So basically she built the Banff. This is the Banff model. So she had six windows installed, and this gave her a lot of natural light. The washroom, no washrooms are in this. So unfortunately we have no washrooms in this. However, in scenarios where we would like, in bigger models, it probably makes sense to add a bathroom, but for now she would have to go back to the house, which is just short, five seconds away. And essentially, so I plopped down in her backyard, and she's been using it for work ever since. And she's even added some extra stuff like coffee table and ability to meet with her colleagues whenever they come over, so they don't bring, the whole COVID thing with,
Nikola, You know, one of the things that you might do is you might use for a, you know, for a bathroom, for a toilet, what you might use is you might use, oh my gosh, I'm kind of losing it here. You might use a composting toilet. The little bunkie that I built, you know, has a composting toilet in it, and it works super well. There's a group, I think out of the States, or maybe it's Canada, I'm not sure, that is called Separate, and it separates out the liquids from the solids, and you only have to clean it out once every 3 months for the solids. It's really an amazing thing. So you could have something in there, so you don't have to connect this building to the sewer system or to your septic system. And they cost about $1,600. They're very, very good, and you can also have a sink in there, and it's simply got bottled water, and you pump, you know, you literally, there's a foot pump and you can wash your hands. So you could do something, you know, very simple and inexpensive. Connecting to the water system is fairly easy. Connecting to the sewer system or the septic system is a whole lot more.
Right. Well, that's interesting. So you said the company was called Separate?
Yeah, reach out to me. I have all the specs on it. Trust me on that, because we use them in a number of our, you know, especially for this kind of thing. So if somebody really wanted a bathroom, but they use them at event centers in, you know, for overflow purposes. I don't mean actually overflow, but if there's too many people, they have them outside, and they work really well. And so they're actually pretty good. So reach out to me. I can certainly, no, I've got one other question here from Ahmed. Where did you build that tiny house for your daughter? So I own a rural property, and it's got a beautiful pond, and it's a lovely, lovely area, but it is environmentally sensitive. So we had to be very cautious how we settled on the property. The bunkie's on piles, which means it stands above the surface. It has a gray water system as well. It has a composting toilet. So it depends. I mean, but in the backyard, certainly you could adapt some of the techniques on it that we used. All right, Nikola, back to you.
Awesome.
And we'll talk about this, Nikola, the last point here, you raised the property value. How did that work?
Right. So we spoke with an appraiser, Tanya spoke with an appraiser, and due to all the upgrades, I mean, she basically said yes to every upgrade because she wanted to really use it as like her dedicated office. But the appraiser gave us a range from like 38 to 41,000, which was about the price of the studio. So I'll go into that a little bit later because that's interesting, since if you put in your line of credit and then you get an appraisal, basically, you know, your equity stays the same.
Fantastic.
So the next case is Milan. He was a financial advisor. He was selling insurance, and he was selling mutual funds and whatnot. And he had his clients that he had to meet on Zoom. And basically, he was renting out an office in Sun Life, and he was paying about $550 a month. And he had to drive 10 minutes, and he had to heat up his car in winter and all that. So it was a little bit of a headache, but you know, he needed a place where he could go on Zoom and he could meet with clients. So he had so his backyard was largely unused, and he was already paying $550 a month. So essentially what we could have done is build his office in his backyard. This way he also adds, you know, a livable space that he could use at home, an extra square footage. At the same time, his payments would go, I guess, towards the payment of the studio. So as he's paying it off, as it's in the bottom box, he's essentially paying and building his equity in his investment. So instead of paying rent towards an office space, he would basically be paying his own studio off. And then at a point of about year 7 or year 8 at this rate, he would have it paid off, and basically he would have an office that he wouldn't be needing to pay anymore. So that's one of the benefits that Milan had. And there's also another case with Anthony. He is a real estate agent, and he also needs an office that he's going to. And here's a great calculation. So essentially, if we took the rent that Milan's paying and we did a cap rate calculation where we, you know, figure out if the rent's $550 and we figure out a yearly income, it'd be about $6,600. We take away about 34% of operating expenses, and we get down to the point where, you know, if we have a base price of 37. And, we compare it to what a high interest savings rate is. We basically have a cap rate of 11.5, which, much better than having that money sit in the bank. And, he has a brand beautiful space that he could use at home. So that's one of the benefits of the StudioPod for the office workers that need it for Zoom and for whatnot.
Well, just for peace of mind too, one of the things I didn't really sort of think through, Nikola, until you pointed out a moment ago, is that the separation between living and working. Like I have a home office here, with a bedroom a couple of flights up from where I am now, and really there is no separation. And I think this idea of backyard office, and you have whatever home is your home. I really like that because when more people were commuting, if maybe it's a half an hour commute, you have a time to decompress. Now, you don't have a whole lot of time to decompress if you're only walking 30 steps, but there is some kind of a physical distancing, I think, that's really important. And I read some statistics in Bloomberg Business Week that just came out very recently that showed that 40% of Americans are now working from home. This is the biggest single change in how people work since the invention of the office building in the late 1800s. Think about that, 40%, and it looks to be something permanent. So when you mentioned EcoPod to me a year or two ago, then StudioPod, I thought, what a great idea, but all indications are that this is going to, you hit I would rather invest in this, to be honest with, than, with all due respect, crypto coins. We had a question for you from BC, from Michael. Would you ship as far as British Columbia?
Right. So the work I would have to do for that is to figure out, we all have the designs engineered and the designs planned, manufactured. So it just have to be a matter of us finding a manufacturer that would probably be closer to BC, since the shipping would probably not make sense if we would, put on a truck and get it to BC. So, Michael, I'll get back to you on that.
I think that Nikola, one of the things that would make sense is if Michael said he would buy 5 of them. So shipping one, I agree, probably doesn't make sense, but shipping 5 might.
Right.
So,
right.
Nikola, would you mind typing into the chat bar, if it's okay with you, your email address and your cell number?
Awesome. So I'll do this.
So while you're doing that, Rose asked a very good question. So put your full name and your cell number and your email address in the chat box. Everybody, you remember, you have to copy it out of the chat box because after the Zoom call is over, it'll disappear. But while you're doing that, we got a couple of other questions, Nikola. Put your cell number in there too, if you don't mind. Perfect. Okay. Is it possible to put more than 1 on a property? I had never thought of that. Could you put 2 on the property?
Yes, we can, and that's what we did. So as long as the base itself is detached, so that if someone from the city would come and measure it, and it says 9 by 12, okay, 12. Okay, so as long as they're detached, then yeah, you could have more than 1 on the property.
Yeah, think about this, Rose. I have properties, like I have a triplex, and it would have 2 or 3 sheds on it, right? Again, all of them the same size, 108 square feet or less. So if you could have 2 or 3 storage sheds, not one big one, as Nikola said, but 2 or 3 detached storage sheds, I don't see why you couldn't have 2 or 3 of these little ones in the back. I hadn't thought of that either. That's a pretty cool idea, Rose. All right, so we'll go to the next slide.
Awesome. So this one is actually an idea that Bruce proposed, and I don't know if Bruce, you saw it on an article, but I dug a little bit deeper into the facts.
Yeah.
And I was actually pretty shocked to see it on the Job Bank, like the official Government Canada website. Last year, about, the stats were that 66% of massage therapists were self-employed. And about 82% of chiropractors are self-employed. So a really, really large amount of them, some kind of home practice or some kind of office somewhere where they're bringing people. And Lana, this one, sorry, this was Lucy, yeah. Sorry, that was so anyway, so she was a massage therapist, and she's bringing clients into her basement where she has a bed and she has a shelf and all that. And she has a home practice, and she has a kid at home. She's 11 years old and she has a husband. And so, there's the whole deal with COVID now and bringing clients into their home. And it's a little bit tricky, but you just, you have to do it. But basically she needed a space where she could have peace and privacy. She wanted the client to feel comfortable. And so the studio in the backyard would be, the 9x12. So she has room to move around. And basically she could bring her clients over and perform the service there. So in this sense, she's able to pay, put the studio in her backyard. And then she could, as we'll go into later, pay a rate of about 200 a month with financing. And so, in this way, she's really able to, in this case, really exemplifies like how she's able to separate work from home. She could take out her practice from her basement and put it into the backyard. And on the next one, sorry, the other one was Lucy, this is Lana. So Lana, she was a hairstylist and she was at Fernandino. And so she basically, so the way it works is she has a chair that she has to pay for. And so she pays about, it varies from $100 a week to, my barber used to pay $150 a week. And it really depends on how many chairs you have in a rent in a space, because you would spread over the rent cost by the number of chairs. But so she would pay about $600 a month. And, she quit Fernandino. And so she cuts hair from her basement. And so she used to pay about $600 a month. She had to get in her car, she had to commute. But basically all she really needed is a chair. She needed her mirror, and she needed her electrical outlets so she could plug in the hair dryer, so she could plug in, just all the different equipment. And
so Nikola, sorry, Jason beat me to it. I was going to ask the question, the same thing. He sees a sink in there. How did you get water to it?
So this client, Lana, this was a case study done by another competitor that I took. And so this was just to illustrate, I haven't serviced a hairstylist yet, but this was just to illustrate the point.
So the answer to the question, if I may, Nikola, so Jason, connecting water is easy. Water pipes are like gas pipes. They're small bore. You obviously in Canada, northern states, you have to burn them and insulate them so that they don't freeze. You can put some electrical trace tape on it so that it keeps it warm even in winter, and you insulate them. So it's fairly simple to do that. But you're going to ask the question, I know Jason's going to ask the question, the next question is, how do you connect it to the septic system? Then probably what you would do is you would do a gray water system, which means you simply dig 1 or 2 6-foot deep pits, you put gravel in it, different grade of gravel, some sand in it, and the overflow goes in there. And it's legal in Quebec, it's legal in Ontario, it's legal in many parts of the United States too. So you're not polluting the area. So you can manage it, but it obviously would be better if you could connect it to the sewer, but that is very expensive to do. So I suspect that's what they did here, but maybe not.
Right. So this is something that I was exploring, and one of the things that I guess one of the customer markets that's going to open up as we go through certain hurdles related to the length of the company year and whatnot. But once we get the financing available for the barbers, which we now have, for them it makes more sense to have a home practice. They'll be able to pay less per month, for just to have that chair. And their commute's less. They could have the clients come, they could have it separated from home. And so this was an interesting case study, since I did have one of my friends reach out to me and they wanted one, albeit it was before we had the financing available. But now that we have the financing available, it would make sense for them to have the chair and this. And so for them, the main draw towards them is, let's just think about like a landlord. They could plop this in the backyard, and this would benefit both the landlord. He would basically put it down and he could reappraise his property. So he would be able to get that, investment back and that cash back quickly. At the same time, the tenant who's paying rent could also be paying cheaper rent payments and have his home business. So there's more for him at the end of the day.
Nikola, sorry to interrupt it again. Where did the finance, who's providing the financing?
Right. So there's Canadian Financial, Patrick Lebreche, is the one providing the secured financing. And so that's our current provider. And there's a few other customers that would probably prefer, and for other clients that would probably prefer different routes, perhaps unsecured routes. And so those, we're actively working with Spyro from Finance It to provide that for customers. But
so I'm just going to stop. I'm going to stop you for a minute. I want everybody, I'm just going to stop sharing just for a second so you can see Nicola's handsome face a little clearer. So think about this just for a moment. If there was no financing for cars or trucks or recreational vehicles, how many cars, trucks, or RVs would be sold in the United States or Canada? Probably not that many. There's always a few rich dudes who can plunk down $140,000 for an Audi, but a lot of people, even people buying expensive cars like that, they like to finance them, and they need to. So if you think about it, Nikola is 21 years of age, and he's thought it through. When one of my daughters went to Leon's to buy some furniture for her rental property, you know, she bought, I don't know, $12,000 worth of furniture. Leon's has financing available. And the financing, Nikola, comes from Desjardins, or used to come from Desjardins. I think they've got a new supplier now. So Nikola is way ahead of most people when, you know, most vendors. He's providing financing. So if you think about it, it means that if I own a property, I could put one of these in the backyard, rent it to, say, a hairstylist who's in one of my apartments and who's using that, and pay Nicola's financing company whatever it costs a month to do it, collect some rent. My cost to acquire this would be negative. I don't know if you guys see that, but that's really good, Nikola. I give you full marks for that. You get an A+ on your assignment.
thank you. So yeah, the whole benefit for business owners would be to, you know, they could, you know, retain a large chunk of the cash and distribute the payments. So for them, it's much easier to, you know, to pay a monthly, you know, 200, 300, 400, whatever it is, instead of paying it outright. So yeah, your model list. We have a question from LEK. So we have not built bigger since we're really trying to gun for the benefit of no permit, and being able to really upgrade and then, you know, refinancing, take your cash out as quickly as possible. So we've spoken to some people that have taken up to 2 months to build. You know, it hasn't been a bigger, you know, backyard structure, but for now we're going to be focusing on the 108s. And then that would be just a little bit of, you know, from like perspective of how we're thinking about it. The 108 product would be like a Horizon one. So it'd be something that we're focusing on delivering to you and the clients and to everyone who was interested in one, so that we could, you know, deliver on a promise of, you know, the best and the fastest construction time, deliver it with great quality. And then the next, you know, things in the pipeline would be to have these designs that would be able to get approved quicker in the government. But for now, we're just keeping that in the pipeline until the summer. So, yeah, so for this one, if you would think about replacing and taking, you know, let's just say Lana goes to the barbershop. So instead of, you know, she's going to the barbershop, she takes her client base with her. She pays the same amount, but, you know, her benefit is she doesn't have to go and commute. And then she would just be basically paying off, you know, the studio. And at a certain point, she's not gonna have to pay rent anymore. And she has her own, you know, home office. She has her own like backyard barbershop clinic. And yeah, so she would benefit from that end. And then at a certain point, she won't even have to pay rent anymore. So commute, and then she won't have to pay rent at a certain point.
So Nikola, we got another question from Mark. It's a very good one. Does the product need to be rented directly to the tenant in the house? The answer to that question is yes. So in most cities and towns today, not all, but most American towns and Canadian towns, home-based businesses are legal. Generally speaking, not so much in condos and not so much in gated communities. But, you know, if you own a duplex or a triplex or a single family home and you're renting it out, the person in that home has the right to have a home-based business in most cities and towns. What you're not really supposed to do is have this thing in the backyard rented to a third party who lives a couple of miles away. Having said that, Mark, I have known people who've done that, right? They have storage sheds in the backyard. They have backyard workshops. They have backyard mini offices like or StudioPods or EcoPods, and they do rent them to people who are not living there. But that is not strictly permitted. However, we do have a workaround for that too. And Mark, you'll be interested in this, and you too, Nikola, and maybe other people on the call. Something I learned from Steve Shepard, my lawyer and a sponsor of this, the ROI group, is one of the workarounds, Mark, is this. You have say a triplex, and a hairstylist is living on floor number 2, and a registered massage therapist is living on floor number 3. And like Rose suggested, maybe you have 2 of these ecopods in the backyard. That's fine, you can rent them to them. But maybe on the ground floor, you have somebody else who wants it. So maybe you have a 3rd one for all I know. And that person doesn't actually want one, but somebody 2 blocks away does. So what you do is you rent that 3rd one to the ground floor tenant, and he sublets it to the person a few blocks away. And you actually give him a little bit of a percentage of the rent you collect. So if you're collecting $550 a month for the thing, maybe you give him $50, and he is actually subletting. So according to Steve, that does pass legal muster. So there might be a workaround for that. Nikola, did you sort of follow what I was saying there?
Yep.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of things, Mark, that we can do that are kind of, maybe a little bit dodgy, but I think they do work legally. All right, so we go to the next one. Scenario 2. Nikola.
So this would be a scenario where, let's just say, different type of rent calculation, but in the case where Lana doesn't want to work 4 weeks out of the month and she works 2, just to illustrate that the cap rate at this point is still very attractive from the perspective of if you look at a high interest savings account. Yeah, and I guess the final one was just the initial purpose of the studio, the case for many people. So just homeowners in general, you have, I guess you could, build a yoga room, as we mentioned in the email, and there's just tons of ideas. Personally, I'm not a big wine person. I'm still into beer, but I know it's an acquired taste, so I might get into it one day. But, think of it as like a wine room, have a few chairs, maybe have a wine rack, and, have some Sonos speakers you can enjoy, or perhaps a cigar lounge, so you don't have to smoke in the house, but you could keep it as your dedicated smoke area, or perhaps even add like an L-shaped couch with a TV on the end for your sports games, so you don't wake up the kids on whatever game you're watching. So just the main benefit for homeowners that we're just looking for extra space is that it gives them, an extension of their already living room. And so just add square footage to the home. And so on the next page, we're going to go into a little bit of the numbers and the figures. We've already have, but just from a different perspective. And so this financing thing, it could basically, if you would take the terms of, let's just say 25 to 30 years, or let's just say 30 years and 3% mortgage rate and a secured one, you would basically be paying something as low as $150 a month with the financing thing. And so this would be of a great benefit, to retain your cash pile and to retain your capital and your equity, and just have some kind of cash flow that's very minimal, and you'll be able to use this for whatever you need. And so more information is you could find on Canadian Financial, Patrick Lebrecht, which is also very helpful from Bruce. Bruce helped me out with this a lot. And so on the next page, we will have a little bit of just different ways to look at the investments. And so on the next page, we looked at already cap rates, specifically, what would happen if we had $525 in rent. And, this would be something, if we put, if a landlord had, for example, a real estate agent, or they had a financial advisor, who's renting out a Sun Life, this would basically be their cap rate, if they would put this in the backyard and they give out the person, like an office space to rent. And then perhaps another way we could wrap our heads around this on the next slide. I did a little bit of a case study. And so let's just illustrate it with, we have Noah. He's self-employed, he's a business owner. And so he, instead of paying $525 a month in rent, he wants to put the StudioPod and he wants to put it in his backyard, or at his location, or at his site, or whatever. And so he needs a place to meet with his clients, but he currently pays $525 a month, but he wants it on his location. And this way, what would happen is if we pay attention to the bolded figure, the very last line, the double line, if he puts the studio in his location and then he refinances it and the property, reappraises it, the property, he'd basically have, he basically put no equity into the deal. He puts his cash into the deal and he takes it out. And then as he's paying for the office space that he already needs, he would basically be paying and growing his equity in, paying off the loan and growing his equity. So at the point of year 7, he would, essentially pay off the studio. And in this way, once he pays off the studio, then he would have an equity value of, right around $40,000. And the benefit would be less commute while also repaying equity. So another one of those benefits of using the studio. And yeah, I guess one of those key factors is the fact that the studio, the cost of it is the same as what the appraisal would be. So even though, the equity position or your capital would go down like this, once you reappraise it, it brings it right back down to even. And so the studios are built, they're built with R20 specification. They're built with basically premium construction standard. And so nothing is going to go wrong in 20 years. We use multiple layers of we use ice shields on the roof. We use high quality shingles, and then we even have metal roofing or tin roofing. And so if we put these things on, there's not going to be any kind of, we can guarantee up to 40 years with tin roofing, because those things, once you put them on, they're just not going to, there's not going to be anything wrong with that. A little bit of a downside with the tin roofing is that, of course, you have, when the rain falls, you have a little bit of the rain, sound coming off the tin naturally because it's metal. But we do a really good job of trying to insulate that with rock wool. So yeah, I guess one of the things perhaps I could ask you guys, the company was originally called StudioPod, and then speaking, the innovation center and the startup incubator at Queens was kind of suggesting that we go with A/B testing. And so one of the things that we wanted to add recently is the fact of manufacturing it with sustainably built materials, and also including as an upgrade solar panels. And as you guys know, there is quite a bit of grant money available for people that are looking to add solar panels onto their property. And so that could knock off, they could knock off the price off the studio. And so that's why we wanted to try out, one of the ways that, we would try out the A/B testing is to change the name and see what people like more. So perhaps a question I could ask you guys is, what do you guys like more, the StudioPod or the EcoPod?
So hold on a second there, Nikola. So everybody take a moment. We're going to do a poll. You got to put in, I'm going to put mine in last. What do you like better, EcoPod or StudioPod? Just type in whatever one you like best. Come on, guys. Mary Lou, come on. We got EcoPod from Greg. StudioPod from Chris. EcoPod, another Eco, Studio. Oh, it's coming close.
Ooh. Eco Studio. Ooh.
Oh, Eco Studio. I like that one. Yeah, it's kind of cool. That's really good. Oh my God, Studio is coming out, I think, a bit ahead here. Are you looking at it, Nikola?
I scooped up that domain, funny enough.
Okay.
I have that domain.
Oh, this was fantastic, you guys. So I'll just put in my 2 cents. The reason I prefer Studio is that there's eco everything now. I mean, there's just eco, I mean, I bet you there's eco oil. I mean, if I Google that somehow or other, eco plastic for all I know. So thank you, Connell. So I prefer Studio, and I love the pod idea, and I just think that's sort of what we're seeing. I wonder what Guillaume is saying, but. So when I think StudioPod, I always thought that was a very strong name. Mark, I trust his judgment too. Is more. He says StudioPod is more descriptive of a high-end product with a purpose. Like I said, there's eco everything, right? So I always like that name. I'm partial to it, but of course, this is your business, Nikola. You have to decide what. Eva says Studio defines the purpose of the product better. I do think it's a stronger name. So I think that's a very, very strong indication that I think that's maybe the direction you want to go in, and I agrees too. So one more thing I'd like to emphasize to everybody. I'm going to stop sharing for another moment here. I'll put that over there. Is that if you own a triplex, a duplex, or a single family home, and you put a workshop in the backyard, you put a StudioPod, I'm going to call it StudioPod now, StudioPod in the backyard, or you put storage in the backyard, and you rent that to a tenant in the building, and you have a bit of a cap rate. I want you to think about it this way. When somebody rents an apartment from you, that's a liability. That's, Mr. Rich Dad, Poor Dad there, Robert Kiyosaki says, that's a liability, right? Because you have to take money out of your jeans and pay it. But when you rent the StudioPod and you run your yoga practice in there, or your RMT practice in there, or your coaching practice in there, that's an asset because it hopefully makes money for you, right? If you have a tenant, if you're an investor like most of us, and you have a tenant who has an apartment and a workshop, or a tenant who has an apartment and a StudioPod, that is the asset, that's the liability. They're likely to stay longer, right? They're likely to be happier. They're likely to be more productive. And the idea, you've heard me say it before, of getting up in the morning in a distant suburb of Toronto or Los Angeles and driving for an hour and a half to an office building, going up 20 floors, being in an office building with windows that don't open and bad fluorescent lighting and bad air, that's not really an attractive way to live, spending 2 or 3 hours a day in your car or on the train or the bus. So I really think of this as both an asset and a liability. And if a tenant has an asset as well as a liability, he or she may stay with you for many, many years and be quite productive and happy as well. Happier tenants pay more rent. That can't be a bad thing. It's also good for our environment. So it is an ecopod in a way, Nikola, because if your commuting is 2 minutes instead of an hour on a car or an hour on a bus, that's better for the environment as well. Nikola, is there anything else you want to add before we turn to John?
Perhaps, well, thank you guys for the input. I took a screenshot of a bunch of these chats, and so I appreciate, once again, thank you, Bruce, for inviting me and letting me present the company. You've been a great help, and we've been speaking for a while, so really appreciate the help.
Well, listen, it was fantastic. Everybody, we can put, those nice reactions in there. I'm going to do it. A thumbs up. I'm going to give Nikola a thumbs up if you want to do it too, or put it in the chat box. What I'll do after this call is over, Nikola, is the chat box downloads to my computer. I'll send it to you, so you'll have a record of it, okay? All right. John, are you going to unmute yourself?
I will.
And I did make you the co-host, so hopefully you can share your screen so I get a little bit of a break. Nikola put me to work.
Okay, let me see if I can do that. Let me share my screen. Share screen. Share. So you guys should see that. So let me go from the beginning.
We can certainly see a lot of documents. There we are. That's very
there you
nice.
go. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Perfect.
right.
Okay, so I'm in control, so you can sit back, put your feet up.
I will definitely,
Bruce.
I'll definitely relax. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you everybody for having me. So I'll move through this slide deck fairly fast so people can throw in a chat or a question as we go along. So we're talking about corporate insolvency explained. So Bruce has already sort of given you my background. The agenda is pretty specific. So insolvency overview generally, just for those people who don't know. So we've heard about a great business venture and listening to Nikola. People call me when those ventures don't go so well. So that's, where we sort of end up. So we will talk about corporate recovery and restructuring, some solutions, and CCAA versus Chapter 11, just at a very high level, Canada versus US. So Canada's CCAA, US is Chapter 11, and then there'll be questions, but as Bruce has said, we can ask those as we go. So who are we? First of all, MMP, just to give you some context, you see a little map there with all our little offices all over the place. So we run a consumer and corporate insolvency team. History, this was a Western-based firm formed in 1958 with one office. Now we are the 5th largest accounting firm in Canada, and maybe 4th pretty soon, depending on how slow EY does and how fast we do. So we just recently did a merger with some Deloitte offices, so I'd be interested to see how we rank. But basically, coast to coast, we're only Canadian. We're Canadian owned, 100%. No foreign ownership. We have some international relationships with other boutique CA firms, but we are a pure Canadian play with our 200 offices offering consumer and corporate services. So high level, who is an insolvent person? So an insolvent person can be an individual or a corporation. Very high level is someone or a corporation who is unable to meet their debts as they come due, as pointed out in number A, who ceases paying current obligations in the ordinary course of business, and whose aggregate property in total is worth less than their debt. So basically you're upside down, right? So more debt than you have assets. So that's a very high level definition, and that applies for individuals and corporations. So no difference there. So the object of insolvency proceedings generally is to provide a fair distribution of individuals' assets. So there has to be a process, right? And the bankruptcy process is the way that you take your assets and you divide them up to your creditors. And as the second point talks about, that there is a scheme of distribution that is set out in the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act or via court order if it's a receivership. So there is a scheme that is set out, and that is it to ensure that there's fairness in the process, so that you're not favoring one individual or one creditor over someone else, that there is a process for equal distribution, and it's basically equitable. It also allows for investigations. So having a trustee license, I am one of 1,100 people in Canada that has this license. So a very unique club. And it gives us the ability to basically investigate all kinds of transactions. You know, in the big picture of examples, you know, you can imagine that I've worked on the GM restructuring. I have had some involvement in the Ottawa Senators restructuring. I worked on WorldCom in the US in a precedent in another firm, but I worked on WorldCom. So we've got some, you know, great exposure to some interesting files, and it gives us, you know, a significant amount of power. It also does allow for setting aside of preference payments and transfers of assets under value. So sometimes in insolvency proceedings, prior to filing, an individual or corporation may transfer assets thinking that they can protect them. Well, the bankruptcy laws say that that's not kosher, and our job as a trustee is to identify those and try to develop a process to get the value of those assets back into the, I guess if you want to call it, piggy bank for distribution to the creditors. So on to the next slide. The results of an insolvency proceedings will basically stop any type of litigation. So basically they call this a stay of proceedings. So a line in the sand, it's like a bug hitting the windshield. No one can go beyond the windshield, which is the trustee, without some type of court order or application and consent of the trustee. The other interesting point on this second slide is that a restructuring plan will remove all of the debt. So the debt does go away. So it doesn't cross over the other side of the windshield. We leave it on the outside. What we let come inside is either debts that we're going to keep using in order to continue on with the company, depending on the options we're using, or just to leave it at the curb. So,
John, can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just first a point and then a question. So for everybody on the call, what John said on the last slide was very, very important. That the moment that you file a proposal to your creditors, or actually John does for you on your behalf if your company's run into trouble, Same thing in a personal situation, by the way. Then the calls of the creditors to you have to stop. They have to go to John. And that is a huge thing. Like I have a client, I won't mention where, but somewhere in the States or Canada, who has a major crisis on his hands right now, in the many millions, maybe even the tens of millions of dollars. And the number of calls and emails, angry calls and angry emails he would get every day is a lot. And that's tremendous pressure. It's hard on the family. It often leads to family breakup. And so when you're in that situation, hopefully nobody on this call will ever be, or who watch this video will never have to face that. But if it does happen to you, going to somebody like John is a tremendous relief of the burden that you are facing. The question that I have for you, John, is this. Who do you feel you really represent? The company and the entrepreneur trying to get a restart, or the creditors?
So that's a good question. So, based on your last statement, I'll say two things. So, all those phone calls that you get, nasty emails, they come to me. So I'm still able to sleep at night. So I guess because I have no personal connection to it. So I still get all those angry phone calls. As I say to somebody, explain your job. I said, my job's easy. Every phone call, there's somebody upset at the other end of it. So I have to be prepared for it. Not too often do you get the thanks for not allowing me to continue to collect my debt kind of phone call. So, we just started a construction file, which in late December. And every phone call is either an angry supplier, angry employee, angry leasing company. So everybody's upset. So we take those on, and I am still able to sleep at night, maybe because I've been doing it for so long. But it does relieve some of the pressure of owners so that they can focus on, is there a plan that I can actually work through, and really focus on that side of it. So getting back into the sort of the thought process as to how we work our way through this. It's essentially a plan, and the company can put something together that we can try to focus on. So in our conversations at the beginning, we sort of represent the debtor prior to filing. And then once we file, we're the referee. So we sit in the middle and we look on both sides of the fence. So consultations and discussions on restructuring plans, my job is to ask the questions that I need to ask to make sure that there are no surprises, that once there is a formal filing of any type, I have to apply the law. So in that case, we want to know everything that's good, bad, and ugly before we file so that we can be prepared for what's going to happen on the other side of the filing. So pre-filing, we're there to give advice, counsel, coach, tell you what our best thoughts are. Post-filing, we represent everybody. And in post-filing, you have to remember that your creditors may know something that you didn't tell me, but they will for sure tell me. So at some point, what you thought you might want to keep away from a trustee may come to the surface that we have to deal with. So we don't like surprises, just like, unless it's a birthday. But if someone's giving me a brand new car in my driveway, that's a nice surprise. A surprise in an insolvency proceeding that could be significant is not something that we want to see happen. It does. And I'm not going to say it doesn't. We do get surprises in insolvency proceedings, and we have to apply the law. And that's where we are basically the referee, to make sure the interests of the debtor and the creditors are equally treated. So continuing on, so who are we? Sort of touched on that again. We are the only ones licensed in the government of Canada that can do this work. There is nobody else. If someone tells you that they can help you on a plan, there is nobody that can apply these provisions of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act other than us. And we've been doing this since 2009, incorporates receiverships, CCAA, bankruptcy proceedings, and proposals. So we're the only shop that can do that. In the educational field, just so you know, that the part of your process of getting your license is you actually have to sit in an oral board where you're screened by the government officials, and they confirm that you can actually apply the Bankruptcy Act as it is written. So we don't even write the act. We're allowed to provide some input, but it's structured by the government of Canada. So you'll see on your screen 4 boxes. You got the bankruptcies, the receiverships, the proposals, and the CCAA proceedings. So those are in Canada, your main restructuring. On the consumer side, you would have bankruptcy and proposals. You don't have receiverships on consumer side, and you don't have CCAA filings on a consumer side. So we're only touching on corporate today, but consumers are bankruptcy and proposals. So talking about a corporate bankruptcy, it is simply a liquidation process. No company comes out of bankruptcy unless there is a sale of assets. So generally a bankruptcy is permanent, fatal, done, closed, people are moving on. It is basically there to assist the unsecured creditors in getting some money after the secured creditors are paid. A receivership is when you have secured creditors. So typically what happens, we get called in by a secured creditor to liquidate the assets on its behalf. So for example, files that we would have worked on locally here, Continental Mushroom Farm Credit would have called us and said, we have a difficult situation. We need to realize on our security, we've got this mushroom farming operation. We need it converted into cash to pay us. So we would be called in to do that kind of work. And how we get called in is by an application filed with the court. So essentially Farm Credit files material with the court, Superior Court of Ontario, and the court grants a receivership application and issues a receivership order that essentially gives me the powers to take over the company, to sell its assets and distribute the money subject to court approval to its creditors. So essentially gives me the keys. So receivership, I am now in control. And we have to deal with secured creditors, which are certificate, usually in most cases. And we also have to deal with landlords, payroll, HST, WSIB, and PST. So receiverships are used when you have a going concern and you want to flip it. I call them sometimes quick flip receiverships. So say, for example, there's a purchase and sale that's contemplated on an asset, but there's a lot of debt. How you get the assets out of old co into new co is you could use a receivership application and get the court to sanction the approval of the sale. And they call that a vesting order. And essentially the vesting order sends all the assets through the other side of the windshield, free and clear of debt. So that's what can pierce the windshield, is through a receivership application. I'm making it sound very simple, but at a very high level, there's lots of legal involved. Receiverships do have lawyers. I would have a lawyer, the creditor would have a lawyer, a buyer would have a lawyer. So there's a lot of lawyers involved. So lawyers like receiverships. So if there's any lawyers on the call, this is like a gravy train of a file for them. So it's much more lucrative for everybody from a professional fees perspective, because it is complex. You are trying to purge the debt out of an existing corporation. You're also going to see today some applications where you actually move the debt through the receivership and you leave the assets with the holdco. Say, for example, if there are licenses for software or high tech, but you don't want the debt in that company, and if you try to move the licenses or those assets, they may be lost on transfer to another corporation. So new methodology that's sort of been passed through the court in the last, I guess, year is essentially a reverse receivership, where you actually transfer the debt to a new co, and the receivership application deals with that. So,
John, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
So if you did 100 corporate bankruptcies or receiverships, in the case of bankruptcy, obviously it's liquidation, but in 100 receiverships, how many of those would be successful in the sense that the company would be able to restructure and then continue in some form?
There's not many, to be honest. That's in a receivership. It's essentially the secured creditor giving up on the company. What would happen is those assets are eventually sold, and then a new form of management and ownership would take over. So it is not typical, especially in this Ottawa region, where you would see too many flip of assets. You would typically use CCAA proceedings more for that than you would in a receivership, because a receivership is purely creditor driven,
Right.
Secured creditor specifically, and their only interest is to get the assets converted to cash. So I would say
Not many.
Yep.
Would you say though that if you remember with the Senators bankruptcy in the mid 2000s, that Rob Brydon, who was in control of the process, at least at the start of it, tried to buy the assets out of the bankruptcy, so that he was there managing the bankruptcy of the hockey team, and then he tried to buy it at obviously a significant discount. Have you had any of those actually succeed, where the existing owner comes back with a new group of and refinances it and takes the assets back at a discount?
Yep, we saw that a lot in the tech bubble. So back in the day when we had tech companies, for that
Right.
exact same reason, is, you know, they've just run out of money, but we've got a good asset or potentially a good asset. So the asset is sold, and management is still a key piece of the puzzle, because sometimes individuals don't want to buy something and try to reinvent the wheel. So in cases where management is key to the process, it does work through a receivership. And again, I want to use the word quick flip receivership, but essentially what you are doing is flipping the assets to a new corp for some consideration. And that consideration would be better than what they would get in a bankruptcy. So at the top of the slide, a bankruptcy is going to be your, you know, yard sale pricing for something. Receivership, in the context of your question, would mean that creditors are going to do better by us allowing the assets to flow to a new co with management as, you know, being part of it or not being part of it. And the upside to that is our realization should be improved for, you know, secured and potentially unsecured creditors. So jumping into proposals. So proposals are essentially, proposals and CCAA, they're all on the same page here because they are essentially the same, except that CCAAs are only apply if there's more than $5 million of debt. So if a company's debt is less than $5 million, it's not allowed to use a CCAA proceeding. And the reason for that is simply cost. CCAA proceedings are very expensive. There is lots of court time. There are a lot of lawyers involved. And, you know, if you're listening or watching the news about Laurentian University's restructuring, the fees on that are like ridiculous because of the number of lawyers and professionals involved. So it is very costly to run, but its purpose is that it can handle large type of engagements where a proposal filing may get bogged down. So I would say if the debt's less than 5 million, your BIA proposal is the way to go, where you set out the terms of settlement with your creditors by class. So you group your secured creditors into one class. Preferred creditors would be employees and landlords into another class, and then you'd have your unsecured creditors. And you can have more than one class of unsecured creditors, and you pay them a proposed distribution, typically over a period of time, and I like to use 5 years, and you can accelerate payments, but a 5-year restructuring plan is something that I typically push for. Gives the company time to restructure, get its feet well grounded back into where it wants to go. And if it needs to accelerate payment, it can, but it also has the advantage that this is an interest-free loan. So when you're looking at restructuring, the interest stops. So if you need cash flow in order to, you know, revitalize your business, then the proposal restructuring will give you that. CCAA will also give you that, but that is more of a creditor-driven process. And there's just significant amounts of court time and reporting that has to go along with it. You know, Nortel was another example of a company that used CCAA. Ottawa Senators did use CCAA in its restructuring. That is basically set out for high debt, complex files where, you know, Bruce will tell you there would have been a lot of court time on the Ottawa Senators file. You know, we handled a piece of that, you know, working on that engagement, but that was in a predecessor firm. So the difference between the two is basically size, right? So again, Air Canada, my little description here, was another company that used the CCAA proceedings in Canada to restructure its way out of its problems back in the day. Talking about Chapter 11 versus CCAA, because we hear a lot about Chapter 11 in the US Bankruptcy Code, and that would be similar to what we have here in Canada. They both have state proceedings. They both stop creditors from trying to collect. The big thing is that if a creditor votes in favor of a proposal and the court approves it, well, they'll have to basically comply with the terms of the proposal, and they can exit Chapter 11 or CCAA. They are more similar But the biggest difference between the two is in the US, pension fund deficiencies are extinguished. Not so in Canada, right? Unfunded pensions can also be extinguished, but the union and the employees have to agree to it. And the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act has actually some trust provisions that were recently added to it that gives it a priority over certain secured creditors. So in Canada, we're not as mean to unionized environments as they are in the US. And then just giving you some comparison about what the equivalents in the US are versus Canada. So Chapter 7 in the US is like a bankruptcy proceeding in Canada. Chapter 13 is proposal. Chapter 11 is CCAA. And in the US, they also have Chapter 15, which is nothing that we have here in Canada, but it does deal with specific cross-border issues. So, in Ottawa, there was a file back in the, I guess, mid 2000 trying to get my dates right. So let's say 2014. It was called Combat Sports. I don't know if anybody knew what that. So Bruce. So what Combat Sports did or does or still doing, I guess. And this might be a good example, Bruce, to your what we do with the company. It operated in the east end of Ottawa. It made basically carbon fiber, low density baseball bats and hockey sticks.
Right.
So I'll give you the hockey connection here on this one. So Combat Sports back in the day were making Yarmar Yager's hockey sticks, and that was their biggest client. And there was also a goalie from the Winnipeg Jets, and I forgot his name now. So those were the two NHL players specifically that were dealing with Combat Sports. Their baseball bats were heavily sold in the US. They were like one of the best. And they had a warehouse, which was very strange, in Seattle. So baseball bats, hockey sticks made in Ottawa, shipped across the border into Ogdensburg, and made their way to Seattle for warehousing. So not a very smart model in a sense of why do you keep all your inventory on the West Coast when the majority of the population and even hockey teams at that point, and maybe even baseball were in the Northeast and Southeast of the USA. So the model wasn't really strong, but they had a great product, right? And so there was a lot of interest in the product. And I'll give the hockey spin on this was that when Combat Sports went into protection, Yarmar Yager wanted all the hockey sticks we had in inventory because he would essentially keep his hockey. But from what I was told, is those hockey sticks stay with him in his room. They never leave, and they were never in anybody else's possession. So for one game, Yager tried to use a Bauer stick and hated it. So we're in possession of his hockey sticks, and Yager's agent calls us and says, "Hey, I want to buy everything you have in inventory for Yager hockey sticks." And we said, "No problem. We're happy to sell them to you." And we negotiated a price. The NHL stood up and said, "Hey, you can't sell hockey sticks to Yarmar Yager," and he was playing for Dallas at the time. And they said, "You're not licensed to sell product in the NHL, so too bad, you can't sell your hockey sticks." So we said, "Okay, that's fine. We'll sell Yarmar hockey sticks to anybody who wants to be like Yarmar Yager, and we'll still probably get good money for it." So we're okay with that. The next phone call we got was from the GM of the Dallas Stars saying, "Don't worry about it. We're going to get a one-time exemption for you to make one sale to the Dallas Stars to sell these hockey sticks." So we made a sale to the Dallas Stars for all the Yarmar Yager hockey sticks. So, and then at the end of the day, we sold the Combat Sports product to Bauer. So he ended up being supplied by Bauer again. So that gives you a little bit of a hockey connection with a local feel that's other than the Ottawa Senators. That was Combat Sports. So, and the reason why we use the CCAA proceeding is because of the cross-border, that we needed to protect the assets in the US, which was the inventory. So we had to have cross-border filings between Canada and the US. So we had to get what they call the recognition order in the US to recognize that the Canadian filing would protect the assets against US-based creditors for the assets that were in the US. So we needed a recognition order is what they call it. I won't try to go into too much of the legals because even then, sometimes you could spend hours on it. So let's talk about signs of being in trouble. This is, we've heard about all this, the options to get you, through a process. What are some of the warning signs? So these aren't obviously all of them, but easy ones to remember. Lack of profitability. If you can't make money doing what you're doing, you're going to get into trouble, right? That's a pretty simple on the consumer side or on the corporate side. Loss of key customers. So sometimes with innovation, your product is improved by another supplier, and therefore you lose key customers. Liquidity or cash flow problems. So a lot of startups need lots of capital to start, and then also need lots of capital to fuel it to the next level. Sometimes the flow of cash comes to an end. The next one, number 4, is the really bad one. So when you build up statutory creditors, so statutory creditors is the government of Canada for employee source deductions and HST. They have personal liability for directors in a corporation. If you get the number 4 and you are not paying your obligations for HST and employee source deductions, you are generating director liability, and that is a true sign of real financial. You have to ask somebody for help. Losing key employees is also important. If you lose your key employees, either on the sales side, manufacturing side, innovation side, it has an impact to your business. Can you, pivot from that point and move forward? Distracted owners. What I say about that is an owner who is good at one thing, core business, and then gets convinced to start forming other little fingers like an octopus and having different arms and different things. And then you're getting pulled in so many different ways that you forget about your core business and you jeopardize your core business. There was a company here in Ottawa that did all the stainless steel work at the Ottawa airport. It was called KS Metals, Diamond Metals. They were, Larry was a great entrepreneur, had a great business and was doing okay, making some money. And then he was asked to participate in a security system corporation, in a garage door corporation. All of those companies came to him and he invested significant sums of capital and trusted that those individuals would run those companies and make profit. Well, that never happened. And what actually happened is it drained KS Metals and Diamond Metals of its cash flow, and the owner was distracted, and the banks finally got wind of the lack of liquidity and called their loans. And that put the end of the Diamond Metal, KS Metal business here in the city of Ottawa. They actually, if you go to the Ottawa airport and you see the stainless steel in that airport, that was all done locally by KS Metals. They also did the train station in Omaha, Nebraska, if you're ever walking through there. They were, one of a unique few in Canada and US that did great metal work. And the reason one of the simple reasons that the company failed was that the owner got distracted and his cash flow was spread out too thin amongst other ventures that he wasn't experienced in and trusted that someone else would do for him. Mismanagement of asset is exactly what it is. You've just not managed your asset well, and it creates financial hardship.
So we have 2 more minutes.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide. You've seen the list. This one is really important. Crisis management chart, and Bruce will be able to send this out. So when do you call for help is essentially, this is the guide. So identifying the crisis, if you think there's an issue, crisis management is the easiest point to avoid restructuring and before your banks get involved, right? So in this area here, in the blue, the banks don't get involved. Intermediate restructuring is when the banks get involved and they're looking for a plan to exit the problem. If you don't do anything there positively, you're in the red zone, right? And the red zone here is not like a football game. You're not scoring any points. You're not getting a touchdown. It's usually the end zone, right? So it will come to an end. And you try to avoid red. People in the blue sometimes try to believe it's not going to happen and will get into the orange zone. And that's the banks taking over, right? So that's when the creditors say, we want to take over this process and you got to keep us happy or you're going to end up in the red zone. And then I got this great slide to end it up. So hello, MasterCard. So if you read this, I'm sorry I missed your last payment, your last 2 months of payments. Money has been kind of tight. So you've been finally prepared to pay my long overdue bill. And their solution was you take another credit card. So if you're paying one creditor with another creditor, it's a good sign that you need maybe to talk to somebody.
That's
That's it.
wonderful. So listen, you guys, I'll stand up to end it. I was getting a bit tired there, John, not of you, but of just standing for an hour and a half. I think this has been fantastic. And one of the things I think that's really important for people who are on the call, and thank you for hanging with us to the end, but also people who are watching it, is that I honestly believe that John is absolutely right. You want to talk to a receiver, a trustee, somebody who's knowledgeable about restructurings before you're in the crisis mode. You're in crisis, but you're not yet at the point where the bank or your lender is going to take action against you. And somebody like John is actually your friend, whether it's a personal situation, your personal financial crisis, or a corporate, they are actually your friend. If they're good at their job, they will give you advice that maybe can allow you to avoid a bankruptcy. I'll give you an example of that very quickly. A tech company that I was coaching some time ago, very successful. They had these fabulous clients. And this is to your point, Christian. They had these fabulous clients, General Motors, Pepsi, McDonald's Europe, you name it. They were a gaming company and they did beautiful games for these companies, $1 million, $1.5 million games. And they were extremely profitable. And the bank was calling their loans. And you kind of go, how is it possible? John would certainly understand this. How is it possible to be profitable and the bank is calling your loans? Because their fundamental structure of cash flow was fallible. It was not right. They would do say $1.5 million job designing some games, online games for Pepsi and Pepsi products, and they would take a 10% deposit on $1.5 million contract, $150,000, and wouldn't collect anything else until the contract was over. But for the next 10 or 12 months or 15 months while they're developing the product, they had to pay their staff and their rent. So you can have a profitable company that goes bankrupt. And as soon as they called me in a panic, they had 10 days or 2 weeks, we had to call up Pepsi and General Motors and McDonald's and all these others and ask them if they would give progress payments. So you have to be very, very cautious that it's not just your accounting statements that you have to look at that says, oh, look, I made a profit. You have to be very aware of what your cash flow situation is, obviously week to week, month to month, all right? So reach out to somebody like John before you're ending up, in a power, in real estate terms, in a power sale or foreclosure with your lender. Talk to your lenders, right? And I really believe that. And look at your fundamental model as some very simple changes we made to that model, where instead of getting 10% upfront and then 90% whenever the damn project was done, they went 30% upfront, 30% about a third of the way through, 30%, another 30%, so only 10% was left at the end. And they were very successful. So there you go. So John, I'd ask everybody again to send John a little love with these little emojis or clap, 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 or whatever. There we go. John, I really appreciate your time. Thank you all for joining us at the ROI Group. I'll put this on YouTube so that the replay will be available, and we'll see you all next month.
Thank you, everybody.